Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Today's story is about what happens when someone mistakes worked here the longest for who owns the place. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Boss solved the mystery of the missing snacks. Years ago, I was hired by a small business to handle all of the accounting and payroll. We had about 10 people in the office, 4 in the shop out back, and roughly 50 field workers spread across different job sites. I supervised 2 people and reported directly to the owner. Then there was the receptionist. Let's call her Karen. Karen handled basic front desk duties and occasionally ran errands for the owner and his wife, things like picking up their dog from the groomer or dropping off paperwork. On paper, nothing unusual. In practice, though, Karen had a full-blown queen bee complex because she'd worked with the owner since the beginning. She acted like that made her untouchable. If you were 2 minutes late, she'd dramatically glance at her watch and raise an eyebrow. If the owner asked her to coordinate something with me, she'd stroll into my office with a smug smile and talk down to me like she was issuing orders. And if you weren't in her good graces, tasks that were part of her actual job, sending packages, scheduling appointments, ordering office supplies, would mysteriously take forever. Eventually, most of us just started doing her tasks ourselves to avoid dealing with her attitude. The owner had a habit of picking up snacks at Costco, granola bars, candy bars, that sort of thing, and leaving them in the kitchen for everyone. One day, he brought in a box of Snickers. I watched Karen practically sprint to the kitchen. As she passed my office, I noticed her arms were full and she was clearly trying to get back to her desk without drawing attention. Later that day, one of the shop guys, Kevin, came into the office. I told him to grab a Snickers on his way out. He laughed and said, "Does Karen know about them? If she does, there won't be any left." Apparently, this was a pattern. Every time snacks showed up, Karen would hoard them. Sure enough, when I checked the kitchen, there was exactly 1 Snickers left. At the time, I just rolled my eyes. It was petty, but not worth my energy. New box of snacks, same routine, whatever. Until a couple of months later, the owner called me into his office about a scary-looking tax penalty notice the company had received. Karen had opened mail that was clearly marked for accounting, another big no-no, and instead of bringing it to me, she ran straight to the owner with it, clearly trying to make it look like I'd screwed up. Turns out the state had rolled out a new system that automatically generated penalty notices for a ton of businesses. We paid everything on time. It took about 15 minutes of digging and a phone call to the assessor to clear it up, but the intent was obvious. That was the moment I stopped ignoring Karen's behavior. Not long after, Karen was out running errands for the owner. I saw him at her desk looking for paper clips, so I helped him search. We opened a drawer. Inside was a literal candy hoard. I'm talking 35 to 40 candy bars, Snickers, granola bars, all of it stockpiled from every snack run the owner had made over the past couple of months. The owner went completely quiet. Then he gathered up every single bar and carried them into his office, laying them out on his desk. The mystery of why snacks vanished so quickly had just been solved. When Karen came back, she put her purse down, opened her drawer, and froze. Confusion turned to panic just as the owner stepped out and calmly said, "Karen, can you come into my office for a minute?" Later, the owner told me she tried to justify it by saying she was owed a fair share because she supposedly worked harder than anyone else. In her mind, that meant grabbing as many bars as she could without looking ridiculous and stashing them away. That explanation did not go over well. She received a formal reprimand and was told that if snacks were brought in, she had to wait a full day before taking one, after everyone else had a chance. After that, she was noticeably quieter and far more professional. Not perfect, but tolerable. The cherry on top, the owner took the entire candy stash out to the shop and gave it to the guys working back there. Kevin came into the office the next day grinning ear to ear and told me that Snickers had never tasted so good. She wasn't quirky. She wasn't old school. She was selfish and thought proximity to power meant immunity from consequences. Hoarding snacks meant fewer for everyone else, especially the people actually doing physical labor. That alone says plenty. Getting formally reprimanded over candy is embarrassing, but deserved. The fact she tried to justify it instead of apologizing says she learned nothing. She just learned to be quieter. Honestly, that's the best outcome, short of her being gone. And our next story. She claimed her disabled badge let her park anywhere. My driveway sits right on the corner of my street, which means it's always been a magnet for bad parking. For years, people treated the corner like a free-for-all, half on the curb, half in the road, blocking sight lines and making it nearly impossible for buses to swing around the turn. After enough complaints, the council finally stepped in and painted double yellow lines along the curb. Bright, fresh, impossible to miss double yellows. Since then, things have mostly been fine. Most drivers see the lines, understand what they mean, and move on. But every so often, you get someone who genuinely believes the rules were written for everyone else. Yesterday, I found one of those people. I was getting ready to leave the house when I glanced out the front window and saw a car parked directly across my driveway. Not slightly over the line, not awkwardly angled, fully blocking it. There was no way I was getting my car out without climbing the pavement or tearing up someone's bumper. At first, I assumed it was a delivery driver. They do it sometimes, engine running, hazards on, in and out in 30 seconds. Annoying, but usually temporary. This wasn't that. The engine was off, no hazards, and I could see a woman already locking the car and walking away toward the nearby shops. I opened the front door and called out to her, keeping my voice calm and neutral. "Excuse me, you can't park there. You're blocking my driveway." She stopped, turned around slowly, and looked at me like I'd just insulted her personally. I pointed at the road. "There are double yellow lines, and I'm trying to leave." She immediately snapped back that she had a disabled badge and was just popping to the shops to collect a parcel. Her tone made it clear she thought the conversation was already over. I explained again, calmly, that even with a disabled badge, you can't block a driveway. I told her I was actively trying to leave. Not hypothetically, not later, but right now. I even gestured toward the shop entrance and said there were clearly marked disabled bays right outside, less than a minute's walk away. That's when her entire demeanor shifted. She crossed her arms and said she didn't want to park at the shops. She said she always parked there. She said she could stay for 3 hours if she liked. Then she added that if I kept wasting her time, she'd call the police herself. And with that, she turned her back on me and walked off. No discussion, no compromise, just pure entitlement. At that point, I didn't chase her, I didn't yell, I didn't follow her down the street. I did what anyone with a functioning brain would do. I checked the law. Disabled badge holders can park on double yellow lines, yes, but only if they're not causing an obstruction and only if they're not within a certain distance of a junction. She was doing both. She was parked illegally, blocking access to private property, and had already been told. So I decided I wasn't moving my car anywhere. I got in, started the engine, and sat there. If she wanted me to move, she could move her car first. I wasn't going to magically teleport through it. About 10 minutes later, despite claiming she'd be gone for ages, she came back. She marched straight up to my driver's window and demanded I move so she could get into her car. I rolled the window down and said, "I'm trying to leave. I can't. You're blocking my driveway." She lost it. She started shouting that I was harassing her, that she was disabled, that I had no right to speak to her like that, and that now I was deliberately blocking her in. I told her calmly that none of that changed the fact she'd parked illegally and needed to move. That's when she stepped closer. She started jabbing her fingers through the open window, shouting inches from my face. Then she slapped the side of my car, hard, twice. I told her clearly and firmly to step away from the vehicle and stop touching it. She didn't. Instead, she reached for the door handle and tried to pull it open. That was the moment the situation crossed from annoying to absolutely not. I got out of the car, took a step back to create distance, and told her to leave me alone and move away. She immediately started yelling that I was threatening her, that she felt unsafe, that I was intimidating her. Then she shoved me in the chest. Not enough to knock me down, but deliberate, aggressive, and completely unjustified. I pulled out my phone and called the police. The instant she heard me say that, her entire attitude flipped. She suddenly decided she wanted nothing to do with the confrontation and tried to get back into her car, only to realize she still couldn't open the driver's door properly because of the angle she'd parked at. At that point, the waterworks started, full-on crying, loud, dramatic, talking about how she'd been trapped, harassed, attacked. Neighbors began coming out of their houses, drawn by the noise. By the time the police arrived, there was a small audience. I explained everything from the beginning. I pointed out the double yellow lines, the blocked driveway, the fresh marks on my car door where she'd hit it. I told them I'd warned her repeatedly. She tried to interrupt several times, claiming she'd been assaulted. One of the officers cut her off and told her to stop talking while I finished. They checked the parking regulations on the spot. They confirmed she was illegally parked, disabled badge or not. They then separated us and took statements. I told them exactly what had happened. She claimed she might have brushed past me by accident. That story didn't last long. One of the neighbors came forward and said they'd recorded part of the incident once the shouting started. The video clearly showed her slapping my car and shoving me. You could see the shift happen immediately. The officer's tone changed. The questions got sharper. The patience evaporated. She was informed she was being reported for common assault and criminal damage. She was also issued a ticket for illegal parking and obstruction. The disabled badge was checked and noted, but it didn't excuse any of it. Her family was called to come collect both her and the car. Before they left, one of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. People like her rely on everyone backing down. They rely on guilt, intimidation, and the assumption that no one will challenge them because it's easier not to. This time she picked the wrong driveway. I eventually left the house, much later than planned, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, being an a-hole actually comes with consequences. Disabled badges aren't a do-whatever-you-want card, and stories like this are exactly why people side-eye legitimate users. She knew the rules, she just assumed she was above them and above you. Blocking a driveway, then assaulting the homeowner, then crying when consequences arrive? That's not confusion, that's entitlement layered on entitlement. The fact that a neighbor's video shut her down immediately says everything. She counted on there being no proof. She lost that bet. And our next story. Toxic Karen bullied me, then got fired for theft. Years ago, not long after I graduated high school, I picked up a job at a pet store to support myself while I started college. I didn't have a safety net, so I needed something steady that would cover rent, food, and gas while I figured out my next steps. The store itself was one of those big chain pet stores you find in any strip mall, but the department I worked in was my comfort zone. Fish, aquariums, reptiles, birds, and all the weird little niche supplies that went with them. I actually liked the job at first. The animals were interesting, the regulars were mostly harmless hobbyists, and I knew my stuff. I'd been keeping reptiles, mostly snakes, for 4 or 5 years by then, so I wasn't just reading labels and guessing. I knew husbandry, feeding schedules, lighting, temperatures, all of it. That mattered, especially when customers were about to drop a few $100s on an animal they didn't understand. The store manager was a guy I'll call Kurt. Kurt was one of those old school managers who believed in showing up, doing the work, and going home. No micromanaging, no power trips. If you did your job and didn't screw around, he left you alone. He treated people like adults, which already put him above about 90% of all retail management. Unfortunately, my direct supervisor wasn't Kurt. My department manager was a large, loud, snaggletooth woman I'll call Karen. From day one, she made it clear she didn't like me. It didn't take long to figure out why. She was the self-declared expert of the department, especially when it came to fish, and she absolutely could not handle the fact that a brand new employee didn't need her hand held, especially not on reptiles. The first time a customer asked a question about snakes and I answered it confidently, I watched her jaw tighten. After that, it was open season. She stopped scheduling me for sales. Every shift I worked, she'd shove me onto goldfish tank duty, scrubbing algae and siphoning water while other employees handled customers. She'd hover nearby and make comments just loud enough for others to hear. "You're the weak link on my team," she told me once while I was elbow deep in a tank. "You're the reason this department has problems," she said another time, completely unprompted. No coaching, no correction, just straight up insults. I kept my head down and stuck it out. I needed the job, and Kurt had always been fair with me, so I figured if I just did my work and avoided her, it'd eventually settle down. About a year in, everyone's hours suddenly got cut. Mine dropped by about 25%, which hurt. I went to Kurt and asked what was going on. He told me the department had lost too much money, low sales, broken merchandise, write-offs. That didn't sit right with me. Our department was busy, especially aquariums and reptiles. Still, everyone's hours were cut, so I assumed it was corporate tightening the belt and moved on. Around the same time, a few coworkers and I started noticing something strange. Karen, who was usually lazy to the point of strategic invisibility, had suddenly become very interested in certain customers. When specific people came in, she'd jump up, insist on helping them personally, and send the rest of us off to do busy work. "Go clean the back," she'd say. "Go relabel the tanks. I've got this." One night, a customer started chatting with us at the reptile wall about how nice Karen is and how she'd been so helpful outside the store, too. That raised a flag. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Karen was breeding animals, mice, turtles, dogs, and selling them directly to customers she met through our store. Off the books, cash deals. She'd quietly hand them her number, then sell animals in parking lots or at their homes. That alone was bad, but it got worse. Our store didn't sell live feeder mice. It was a corporate policy. We also publicly condemned backyard breeding of dogs and cats and donated time and money to shelters. Meanwhile, Karen was doing the exact opposite, using our customer base to fund her side hustle. And while she was making money, our department's hours were getting cut. That's when things clicked. One evening, I watched her help one of her customers. She walked them around the department, filling a cart with expensive aquarium decorations, lighting fixtures, filters, specialty bulbs, the kind of stuff that adds up fast. I quietly followed and wrote down every item she grabbed. She personally walked them to register 2 and rang them up herself. That alone was weird. Karen hated registers. I noted the time and went back to work. Later, I talked to the cashiers. They confirmed she only rang up certain customers and acted strange when she did. One of them said, "I think she's using coupons that don't belong to them," or something worse. That night, I went home and typed up everything. I got coworkers to back me up about the under-the-table animal sales, the selective customer help, the suspicious checkouts. Then I went to Kurt. I handed him a piece of paper with about 20 UPCs and a time written on it. "If you look up a transaction from Register 2 at this time last night," I said, "you'll probably find a big discount. These are the items that should be on that receipt." He looked confused, so I explained everything. I made it clear I wasn't accusing anyone lightly. I just couldn't ignore what I'd seen anymore. He thanked me and said he'd look into it. A couple weeks later, I came in for my shift and noticed Kurt standing near the front door, watching closely. Karen walked in for her shift, and the second she clocked in, Kurt called her into his office. Inside was a regional manager from corporate. I found out later that Kurt had pulled transaction logs from the time I gave him. There was a receipt, exact match on time. It only listed about half the items I wrote down, but every item on the receipt was on my list. That was enough to start surveillance. Over the next few weeks, they watched her closely. What they found was worse than anyone expected. She'd walk her customers through the store, scan every other item at the register, and let the expensive stuff ride through unpaid. Then she'd mark identical items as broken later to balance inventory. When they checked the damage logs, her name was all over them. Aquarium decorations, lights, filters, written off at nearly 10 times the normal rate compared to the same quarter the year before. By the time they were done, she'd stolen over $3,500 in merchandise. The day they fired her, Kurt had police waiting. I was on the floor when she came out of the office, red-faced and screaming. 2 officers walked her past about 20 employees. She locked eyes with me as she passed. I didn't say a word. I just gave her a quick little wink. And that was the last time I ever saw Karen. It's wild how often managers miss this stuff until someone lower on the ladder speaks up. The hours getting cut, inventory losses, write-offs skyrocketing, all of that was visible. But because she was loud and confident, no one questioned her. Meanwhile, the person actually doing the job was treated like dead weight. Retail culture rewards the wrong people way too often. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.